As the train exhaled its last breath of steam and vanished into the embrace of the distant hills, Bellar Mayfield stood solitary on the platform, her silhouette a testament to the weight of unfulfilled promises. Her gloved hand tightened around the straps of her satchel, the knuckles blanching against the delicate lace, a silent scream of hope clinging to the threads. No tears escaped her eyes, not yet. To cry would be to admit that part of her still believed in a return that would never come. The station now void of movement, except for the whispering wind and the distant, scrutinizing gaze of a few locals bore witness to her abandonment. Bellar, with her generous curves that seemed to unfairly capture the sunlight, cast shadows that stretched longer than the heartstrings she felt being pulled. Her lavender dress, chosen for its promise to soften the contours of her face, now seemed a cruel irony in this desolate place. The fabric strained at the seams, a silent testament to her journey and her solitude. She had waited her heart pitched to those 6 eager letters, each one a promise from a man who claimed her size was no barrier, only her honesty was required. But here she was alone, the air thick with the scent of tobacco heat and the bitter taste of disappointment. No one came for her, not with flowers, not with a ring, not even with the common courtesy of presence. Bellar shifted her trunk, its weight a metaphor for the burden she carried beside the bench. The wood groaned as if sharing in her sorrow. It was a piece borrowed from her aunt, once sky blue, but now chipped and weathered much like her spirit. A woman of lesser resolve might have sought shelter at the nearest inn, but Bellar remained, her posture rigid, her gaze steady, her breathing measured. Nearby, the world seemed to continue its merry dance. 2 boys, wild and free, tumbled from a freight cart, their laughter piercing the heavy air. One nearly tripped over her trunk, pausing to look up at her with wide, curious eyes. Bellar met his gaze with a quiet dignity, her mother's words echoing in her mind. "Remember, darling, you are never truly alone when you carry your pride." Kindness, it seems, doesn't always need to shout its presence. The boy, with curiosity etched into his youthful features, tilted his head, eyes wide and questioning. "You the new school teacher?" he asked, his voice tinged with hope. "No," Bellstar replied, her voice a soft whisper carrying a gentle melancholy. "I was supposed to be someone's bride." The boy's brow furrowed in confusion, his innocence wrestling with the weight of her words. He ventured, his small voice barely a murmur. Bellstar's eyes, pools of unshed tears, met his. "No, sweetheart," she breathed out, the words catching slightly. "He's not coming." Before the boy could respond, a deeper, more weathered voice cut through the tender moment. "Ben, don't pester the lady," it commanded, not unkindly. The man who approached seemed to carry the chill of many winters in his gaze. His rough coat hung on him like a second skin. His boots were dusted with the earth of hard labor, and beneath a mess of dark stubble, his jaw was set firm, not in arrogance, but in the stoic acceptance of life's relentless push. He wasn't the kind of rancher who needed to prove anything. He was simply a man striving to remain standing in a world indifferent to his struggles. "Boone Carter," he introduced himself, tipping his hat with a nod of respect. "Ma'am, sir," he acknowledged the boy and Bellstar with equal courtesy. The boy, now joined by his brother, scampered back to the safety of their wagon, leaving Bellstar with this rugged stranger. "You need a ride somewhere?" Boone asked, his voice carrying a quiet strength. "I don't suppose you know a Mr. Langley Carver?" Bellstar inquired, her voice attempting nonchalance, but her fingers betrayed her tightening around her satchel. Boone shook his head, his expression one of honest regret. "No Carvers around here, not that I trust anyone named Langley with much," he added, a wry twist to his lips. A laugh, bitter and raw, escaped Bellstar, a sound as sharp as the snap of a twig underfoot. "Well, I trusted him with my future. Foolish me." She confessed, the pain in her voice palpable. "You come all this way on your own." Boone's voice dropped, a note of concern threading through his words. Bellstar nodded, the journey replaying in her mind. 3 trains, 1 stagecoach, 2 months of letters, and 1 broken promise. He didn't offer empty reassurances, just looked at her with a silence that didn't seek to mend, but rather to acknowledge the hurt, allowing it room to breathe. "My name's Boone Carter," he said at last, his voice steady. I got a farm up north, 2 boys, a good horse, and an old roof that needs patching before the rain season. Wasn't planning on picking up anything more today than nails and flour. And yet here we are. Bellstar said, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. He nodded his eyes, reflecting a newfound curiosity about this woman who had come so far only to find herself so alone. You planning to hold fast, Miss Mayfield? Bellstar Mayfield. He smiled, a small, uncertain curve of his lips. Miss Mayfield. Bellstar will do under the circumstances. She met his gaze, finding no condemnation there, only fatigue and a flicker of something deeper. Respect, perhaps, or a shared recognition of souls battered by the same harsh winds. Do you have anywhere to go? He inquired gently. When she shook her head, he simply nodded, a silent acknowledgement of her plight. The wind rose, scattering dust over the weathered boards underfoot. After a long pause, he spoke again, his voice heavy with the weight of memories. My wife passed 2 winters back. Influenza took her swiftly. Left me with 2 boys and a mule with a penchant for biting. Bellstar clasped her hands in her lap, her mind racing to understand where this conversation might lead. I tried to find help, neighbors, kin, but no one lingers when the toil is relentless and there's little sweetness at home's end. His eyes drifted toward the general store, then back to her. The boys, they need a woman's voice, someone steady, someone not scared of tough times. Bellstar fixed him with a piercing look. I'm not offering pity, he added hastily, his words tumbling out. You look like someone who's had her fill of that. I'm offering you a name, a place, a chance to be more than what that coward abandoned. Her voice was a whisper, barely escaping the confines of her throat. You're asking me to marry you. Not asking, he corrected, his tone firm, yet not unkind. I'm laying it bare. You don't have to say yes. Blinking in surprise, Bellstar responded, you don't know me. I've seen enough in 5 minutes. You didn't cry when he left you. You sat with your back straight, holding on to your pride even as your world crumbled. Her gaze shifted away, her heart pounding. I wanted to cry, but I didn't. From the wagon, his sons waved their innocent faces, a stark contrast to the gravity of the moment. Bellstar followed Boone's gaze, her eyes meeting the hopeful, eager looks of the children. You'll be mother to those boys. His voice was almost a plea. I don't know how. Neither do I, he admitted. But she should have laughed at him, dismissed him as desperate. But instead, a tender, flickering flame ignited in her heart, a spark meeting kindling. Boone didn't appear as a man who made offers casually, nor one in need of rescue, but rather as one ready to share his wreckage with another soul. I'm not thin, she admitted at last, her voice a whisper of vulnerability, nor blind. I've been told I'm too much or not enough. They lingered in a silence, heavy with unspoken words, the world itself seeming to hold its breath in anticipation. Is there a preacher in this town? Bellstar's voice was a hushed inquiry laced with both trepidation and a strange resolve. Boone's smile was as enigmatic as the favor he was about to call in. He owes me 2 favors and a coat. That should count for something. Her hands trembled as she smoothed her dress, the fabric whispering against her skin. Then let's get this over with before I regain my senses, she declared, her resolve mingling with a hint of desperation. He extended his arm in offer of solidarity. After a moment's hesitation, she accepted it, their steps synchronized towards the chapel. Bellstar Mayfield, he said, his voice a gentle reassurance. I reckon today was meant to break you, but I see no brokenness standing beside me. Her breath hitched a silent sob in her throat. You're either the kindest man I've met or the most foolish. Can I be both? His question was met with her laughter, a sound so genuine and unexpected it surprised even her. Boone guided her past the townsfolk, their eyes wide with curiosity and judgment. The sun lowering in the sky stretched their shadows long across the ground, foretelling either a storm or salvation. Inside the chapel, the air was thick with the scent of wax and aged wood, the windows rattling as if in sympathy with the vows soon to be spoken. Bellstar stood beside Boone, her hands clasped tight, her knuckles pale. The preacher, a portly man, with eyes that seemed to hold the weight of many stories and a hat that sat comically large on his head, awaited them. With the vows now spoken, the words tumbled from the preacher's lips, like a hurried incantation meant to calm a wild beast rather than a solemn union of two souls hastily binding their destinies with the raw threads of necessity. Boone's son stood close by, one nervously clutching a handful of prairie daisies, the other gnawing on his thumb with wary, youthful eyes. They grasped little of the ceremony's gravity, only that their father's voice carried the same authoritative tone used when fixing fences in a storm, unyielding, conclusive. Bellstar, her voice quivering, just once echoed the vows. When the preacher posed the pivotal question, "Do you take this man?" She paused, breath held in a moment of reflection. Yet Boone remained unwavering, his gaze upon her, devoid of judgment or pity, simply waiting. That serene patience was her anchor, and with newfound resolve she declared, "I do." Not as an act of defeat, but as a deliberate choice. Their kiss was fleeting, a mere whisper against the lips, yet it sealed an unspoken promise between them. The preacher, with a nod and a mumbled, "That'll do," retreated, his robes rustling softly in the background. Stepping outside, Bellstar shielded her eyes from the sun's glare. The train station still stood sentinel, a stark reminder of how abruptly life could pivot on the sound of a whistle. Boone extended his hand once more and she accepted it, her fingers noting the calluses marks of honest toil, not of harshness. They boarded the wagon where Boone's eldest son assisted her with an unexpected tenderness, a gentleness surprising from a boy accustomed to the harshness of dirt and silence. As they departed the town, Bellstar felt the weight of curious, judging stares from behind. Whispers of desperate and foolish floated in the air, but she kept her eyes forward. The road north wound through the parched grasslands, past clusters of birch trees, their leaves rustling in the wind, turning yellow with the season's change. Boone, for his part, remained silent. The boys nestled against each other in slumber. As twilight painted the sky from blue to a shimmering gold, Bellar felt the gentle nudge of a breeze, a soft whisper asking, "You still breathing over there?" Boone's voice broke the tranquil silence that had settled between them. "I think so," she replied, her voice a mere thread of sound. "You did good back there," he said, his eyes reflecting the warm hues of the setting sun. "I didn't faint, if that's what you mean," she quipped, a hint of a smile playing on her lips. He chuckled, the sound mingling with the rustling leaves. That too. The silence that enveloped them was not burdensome. It was an open canvas awaiting the strokes of their shared story. Boone allowed the reins to ease, coaxing the mules up a ridge where the land unfurled into a vast, endless prairie. Bellar shifted in her seat, the landscape's enormity making her feel both insignificant and part of something grand. "You said you lost your wife." She ventured, the memory of his words from earlier stirring within her. "2 winters passed," he confirmed, his voice heavy with the weight of loss. "Flew through like fire, took half the town, took her fast." "I'm sorry," she whispered, her heart aching for him. "She was kind, wasn't she? Never raised her voice, even when I deserved it." He murmured, his gaze distant. "You don't have to be her, Bellstar," he said, turning to face her. "I didn't marry you to fill a void. Why did you marry me then?" Her question hung in the air, a delicate thing. He considered his words carefully. "Because I needed someone strong enough to carry more than just water buckets. Someone who wouldn't wilt when the world turned mean." "You think I'm strong?" Her voice trembled slightly, the wind catching at the edges of her words. "I think you've been standing on cracked ground so long you don't realize it's you holding the roof up." Bellar had no words for that revelation, so she let the wind speak for her, its touch stinging her eyes, though not from the dust. The sun dipped lower, and Boone pointed toward a hill where a crooked fence meandered across a slope. "That's home." The cabin appeared weathered and humble, its roof a patchwork of too many colors of wood, the porch slightly askew. Chickens scattered as they approached, and a tired dog barked twice before recognizing the familiar wagon. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of pine soap smoke and slightly stale bread. Bellar's trunk was placed against the wall, a silent sentinel of her new life. A rocker creaked softly in the corner, inviting her to sit to rest to be part of this new chapter. She stepped inside, her movements deliberate, each step a promise of beginnings. Feeling like an intruder in a life not her own, Bellstar observed as Boone effortlessly navigated the simple yet profound daily rituals of his home. He showed her the places where water was stored, the kettle matches, and the hooks where her coat could find a home. His movements were seamless, unhurried, a man accustomed to coexisting with the echoes of past lives. That evening, they gathered around the hearth, the warmth of the fire casting a gentle glow as they shared a simple meal of beans and cornbread. Boone's sons Emmett and Samuel huddled near the fire, their eyes reflecting the flickering flames. Bellstar watched them from her side of the table, a silent observer in this tableau of domesticity, uncertain of her role. When she reached for their plates to wash, Samuel recoiled, a flinch that spoke volumes of his guarded heart. "I won't hurt you," she whispered, her voice a tender promise. Boone's gaze met hers, his eyes a pool of understanding. "They ain't used to kindness yet. Give them time," he urged. "I'm not their mother," Bellstar replied, her voice tinged with a mix of resolve and sadness. "No, but they'll learn what your voice means soon enough." Boone reassured, his words a soft balm to her doubts. Later, Boone offered her the bed, his own decision made clear, with the simple act of grabbing a blanket for the chair. "We just got married," she said, her tone laced with caution, a question wrapped in a statement. "Doesn't mean I get to demand more than you're ready to give." He responded, his respect for her boundaries palpable in the quiet of the room. Bellstar nodded, feeling her heart uncoil for the first time since she stepped into this new life. The days that followed were raw, real, and filled with the simple joys of domestic life. Bellstar learned to gather eggs from hens that pecked with the sharpness of old maids, chopped vegetables, mended clothes, and swept the floor, all while Samuel silently trailed behind her, his presence a silent testament to his acceptance. At night, she read from her old prayer book, her voice filling the room, and Boone listened, eyes closed, not in prayer, but in presence. One crisp morning, as she hung clothes on the line, laughter erupted from the barn. Emmett, his cheeks smeared with mud, was chasing a runaway goat, his grin as wide as the open barn doors. Boone stood nearby, his arm crossed, a lopsided smile on his face. "She likes you," Emmett exclaimed, pointing at the goat. "I must smell like her cousin," Bellstar huffed, catching her breath. Boone approached, his gaze warm. "You're doing better than most would. They ain't easy animals," he said, his voice a mix of admiration and jest. "Neither am I," Bellstar shot back, her spirit undeterred, her eyes meeting his with a spark of challenge. Boone looked at her, really looked, seeing not just the woman, but the soul that was beginning to weave itself into the fabric of his life. That night, as the wind howled through the gaps in the walls, Bellstar found herself wide awake while the rest of the world slumbered. Wrapped in her shawl, she stepped out onto the porch, her gaze lifting to the vast starlit sky. The land seemed to hold its breath, a silent witness to her solitude. Boone, his boots whispering against the wooden boards, joined her. "Do you miss the city?" he inquired softly. "I miss knowing what's around the corner." Bellstar confessed, her voice a mere whisper against the night. Boone nodded, his eyes thoughtful. "Out here, we just keep moving forward, one fence post at a time." Bellstar hesitated, her heart heavy with unspoken thoughts. "I keep thinking he might show up, the man who left me at the station. What if he does?" Boone leaned against the rail, his presence solid and reassuring. "Then he'll see what he lost, and I'll make sure he doesn't forget it." She looked at him, her eyes searching his face. "You don't even know what I'm worth." His voice was steady, his gaze unwavering. "Maybe not, but I see how your hands never stop moving, how the boy now sleeps through the night, how my house no longer feels like an empty shell." Her throat tightened, emotions swirling within her. She blinked rapidly, then let out a soft laugh. "That's a lot for a woman with a broken trunk." He stepped closer, his warmth a contrast to the cold night air. "It's not the weight that matters," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "It's how you carry it." Their eyes locked a moment, stretching between them, charged with unspoken words and uncertain futures. "I'm not asking you to fall in love with me," Boone murmured, his voice low, almost lost in the wind. but I won't stand by if someone tries to take what's mine." Bellstar didn't respond with words. Instead, she leaned against the railing beside him, their shoulders touching, watching the stars until the chill of the night forced them back inside. And there, in the quiet depth of her soul, Bellstar sensed a shift, not because she was chosen, but because for the first time she had chosen back. The frost came early that year. One crisp morning, the windows were adorned with a kiss of ice, delicate frost patterns unfurling like intricate lace in the corners. Bellstar, feeling the chill, wrapped herself in her shawl and moved to the stove, tenderly feeding it wood, coaxing the flames to dance and warm the room. Outside, the wind screamed across the plains, a fierce, biting force of nature. Boone was already awake, his figure silhouetted against the dawn, as he split logs behind the barn, with a silent, intense focus she had come to know so well. The boys, still nestled in their quilts, their breaths creating soft clouds in the cold air, were oblivious to the morning's chill. Bellstar filled the tin basin with steaming water and washed her face. As she glanced at her reflection in the water's rippling surface, she noticed a change. It wasn't about her appearance, neither thinner nor softer, but something more profound. She felt rooted, as if the very land had begun to mold her into someone new, someone resilient. Later, as the morning light began to spill through the windows, Boone returned, his hand clutching a letter, its paper creased and spotted with mud. He extended it to her, with a look that suggested it might combust at any moment. Bellstar, drying her hands on her apron, accepted the missive. The handwriting was sharp, almost aggressive. "To Bellstar Mayfield, I was informed you proceeded with the marriage, that you dared to take another man's place while still bearing the title that rightfully should have been mine. You will rue the day. I am coming." The signature, a hasty slash, was unmistakably Langley Carver's. The name alone caused her stomach to churn. He had been silent since the day she stepped off the train into a world of silence. Now, out of the blue, he remembered her existence. Bellstar read the letter once more, her lips tightening into a determined line. She folded the letter with deliberate care and handed it back to Boone. "Well," she said, her voice unwavering, "the rat wants his cheese." Boone's face remained impassive. "He knows where we are. He'll come with fists or lawyers, and he'll find me with a rifle." Boone sat at the table, his fingers tracing the rough edge of the wood, lost in thought. The letter crumpled under the pressure of his thumb. "If he dares to claim what he discarded, we must be prepared." Her voice sharp as a knife cut through the silence. "He abandoned me, left me to wither, that letter. It's the echo of a man who realizes the treasure he cast aside has been unearthed by another." Boone nodded in agreement, his eyes scanning the horizon. "Yet we must ensure he does not mistake our land for a pasture of meek sheep. We'll show him the wolves that guard this territory." 4 days later, Boone toiled like a man fortifying against an impending deluge. He mended the fences, honed every blade to a razor's edge, and polished his rifle until it shone like a mirror. Bellstar, on the other hand, steeled herself not with weapons, but with resolve. She taught the boys the art of silence in the face of danger. While hanging the laundry, her gaze never strayed from the distant horizon, her ears ever alert to the sound of approaching hooves. The tension was palpable, woven into the very air they inhaled. Bellstar found herself recoiling at every unexpected sound, every distant shout from the road. As dusk spread its fiery hues across the sky, Boone placed a revolver in her hand. It was small, fitting perfectly into her palm like a whispered secret. "You don't need to use it," he reassured her. "Yet knowing it's there might suffice." Bellstar gazed at the gun, her voice tinged with awe and fear. "I've never held a gun before." "Well, now you do," he affirmed. "I don't want to shoot anyone." "Neither do I," she whispered, her voice dropping to a resolute whisper. "But if he thinks he can reclaim me as if I were mere property—" Boone's gaze locked with hers, fierce and protective. "He won't get close enough to even try." The storm broke the following afternoon. A distant cloud of dust heralded the arrival of riders long before their hooves could be heard. Bellstar was stirring the stew when Boone tensed at the window. "Riders," he murmured, stepping outside with a determined stride. Boone stood resolute, his rifle casually slung across his back, a silent sentinel at the edge of the world he'd carved out of the wilderness. Bellstar followed her revolver concealed beneath the folds of her apron, a quiet testament to her own resolve. In the barn loft, ECMTD and Samuel watched their breaths held, instructed to remain silent and still as the tension unfurled below. Three figures emerged on the horizon, riding with purpose toward the homestead. Langley Carver led the trio, perched on his horse like a man posing for a grand portrait, his black coat billowing in the wind. His face sharp and devoid of the creases of honest labor, wore the smug expression of one who had never known a day's toil. Behind him, two nameless brutes, his hired muscle, followed closely. At the fence, Boone's voice cut through the air, sharp and commanding. "You've got about 10 seconds to say your piece," he declared, his voice steady as the ground beneath his feet. Langley dismounted with the deliberate grace of a man who had all the time in the world. "You must be the man who picked up my leftovers," he sneered, his words dripping with disdain. Bellstar's fingers twitched under her apron, but Boone remained unruffled by the insult. "You've got no business here," Boone stated, his voice as cold as the winter wind. "I've got all the business in the world," Langley retorted, stepping forward with an air of entitlement. "That woman was promised to me. She came with the intent to wed. I paid for her passage. That makes her mine." Bellstar, your spirit undeterred, stepped beside Boone, her chin high. "You're not owed anything but the shame you left behind," she declared with fiery resolve. Langley's smile was as thin as a knife's edge. "You think that ring means anything? There was no license, no papers filed. She's still legally free." "Then we'll file the damn papers," Boone responded, his tone icy. Langley's gaze shifted to Bellstar, his eyes narrowing. "You really think you belong here, out in the dirt, with these half-wild children and a man who reeks of cowhide? You were meant for better." Bellstar's laughter, unexpected and bold, filled the air. "I was meant for freedom," she retorted, her voice vibrant with newfound strength. "And I found it the day you didn't show up." Langley's face contorted, his composure slipping. Boone shifted his stance, his eyes never leaving Langley's. "You want to test the rest of this conversation with a bullet? Or are you smart enough to leave with your pride mostly intact?" His words hung heavy, a challenge wrapped in a question echoing across the silent expanse of the homestead. As Langley's man lunged for his weapon, Bellstar's hand moved with a swift grace, her revolver rising first. The sharp metallic click of her hammer echoed through the tense air, halting Langley's man in his tracks. Her voice, steady and resolute, pierced the silence. "I may not have mastered my aim yet," she declared, "but from here, precision is unnecessary." Boone, standing like a steadfast barrier beside her, turned to Langley. "Are we finished here?" he asked, his tone laced with a challenge. Langley's face contorted with anger, his nostrils flaring, but his men wavered, their earlier bravado shattered by Bellstar's bold stand. "I'll return," Langley spat venomously, "with the law, with more men. You can't always cower behind your barn. And you're a woman." "You could bring an entire army," Bellstar retorted, her gun lowering with a defiant grace, "but you'll still find me here standing my ground." Langley's response was silence. He turned abruptly, mounted his horse, and rode away, his men trailing behind with a newfound wariness. The dust they kicked up seemed to linger like a shroud of their retreat. Boone's eyes followed them until they vanished into the distance. Bellstar, her hands trembling as she reholstered her weapon, met his gaze. "Are you okay, he asked softly. "No," she admitted, "but I'm still here, I am." His fingers brushed against her sleeve in a gentle gesture. "You didn't just stand there, Bellstar. You drew the line in the sand." She laughed, a softer sound this time tinged with relief. "I'll need to practice. My aim was atrocious." "Next time we'll aim it for bottles," Boone promised, a smile breaking through his concern. That evening, they dined in a silence, not of fear, but of the profound fatigue that follows the reclamation of what was unjustly taken. The children nestled against Bellstar as she read from her prayer book, her voice a soothing balm over the day's harshness. Boone watched her, and for the first time since the wedding, he saw not the woman left behind, but the one who remained, who stood tall, and who was beginning to believe in her own worth. Outside, snow fell in gentle, silent drifts over the Carter homestead, covering the barn roof, smoothing the sharp edges of the fence posts, and transforming the landscape into a serene tableau of resilience and renewal. At the kitchen window, Bellstar cradled a mug of weak coffee, her gaze following Boone as he carved a path through the snow-draped prairie, transforming its ruggedness into a serene landscape. The world seemed to pause under the heavy blanket of snow, as if in silent anticipation. Boone's movements deliberate and steady, despite the lingering stiffness in his shoulder from the previous storm, cleared the path with a quiet determination. Inside, the hearth's warmth enveloped the room where the boys lay sprawled, their fingers tracing shapes in the soot on the stone. Samuel's sketch, a rough outline of their goat, brought a gentle smile to Bellstar's face. There were moments like this when the reality of her life here felt almost surreal. Not the land or the house, but the peace, the sanctuary where love was given freely and the air was clear of any lingering shame. She caressed the growing stack of books on the side table, remnants of a traveling bookseller's visit. Now, every Sunday, 3 neighboring children braved the snow, their faces alight with excitement, eager to learn from Bellstar, who had once been discarded like an unwanted piece of luggage. Boone returned, shaking off the snow and hanging his coat. He approached, planting a kiss on her cheek, a silent greeting that spoke volumes of his affection. His lips lingered, a testament to the fact that despite the daily routine, his love for her was as fresh as the first day. The wind shifting outside sang sharply through the eaves, and Bellstar's grip on her smug tightened, a subtle sign of the memories that this time of year evoked. "You all right?" Boone's voice was soft, a gentle inquiry. She nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "Just that time of year, I suppose." He understood. It had been nearly a year since her arrival, since the train, the letter, the beginning of this new chapter in their lives. A mere year had passed since she was swept into a whirlwind of vows in a humble, crooked chapel. A year since she was claimed by a stranger who had since become the architect of her new life, rebuilding her spirit within the sanctuary of his home. Now they sat entwined on the porch, the afternoon sun casting long shadows as they rocked, gently enveloped in a peaceful silence. Nearby, the boys, with the exuberance of youth, dashed along the snow-tracked path, their laughter and shouts filling the air as they threw snow at one another with reckless abandon. Boone's arm, strong and comforting, found its way behind Bellstar's back. She leaned into him, her senses filled with the comforting scent of pine and the rugged aroma of leather. Their quiet was suddenly pierced by the appearance of a rider, a solitary figure on a dark horse cutting a stark silhouette against the snow-laden landscape. No dust cloud heralded his arrival. He was alone, a stark contrast to the white expanse. Boone was the first to rise, his movements deliberate and calm. "Inside," he instructed, his voice steady, his eyes never wavering from the approaching figure. Bellstar, without argument, ushered the boys into the cabin, securing the door behind them, yet she could not bring herself to remain hidden. Through the frost-kissed window, she watched as Boone stepped off the porch, his rifle subtly positioned by his leg. The rider dismounted with a practiced grace, his coat billowing around him. It was Langley, his hat brim dusted with frost, his cheeks flushed from the biting wind, yet his eyes retained a chilling coolness. "I came alone," Langley called out, his voice carrying across the still air. "I figured you'd prefer that." Boone remained silent, his stance unyielding. Langley took a cautious step forward, his voice tinged with a mix of bitterness and resignation. "I thought I'd be the one who would mold her into something. You thought wrong." A small, bitter laugh escaped him. "And yet you did it. You married her, built something out here." Boone's silence was his only response, his presence a quiet testament to his resolve. Langley's gaze drifted toward the house, his voice softening. "She's stronger than I remembered. When I saw her at the station, I thought she'd give up, board a train, back east, and fade away. But instead, she grew roots." Boone's reply was firm. "She owes me nothing." The air hung heavy between them, laden with words left unspoken. Langley sighed, a sound of reluctant acceptance. "I didn't come to take her back. Langley stood, His eyes locked on the ship that had long since sailed, the one bearing the memories of a love now faded into the past. Curiosity gnawed at him, an insatiable urge to see the kind of man who now stood in his stead. Yet Boone, with a voice as firm as the ground beneath their feet, declared, "You weren't replaced, Langley. You were erased." Langley felt a spark of defiance, but it flickered and died like a candle in the wind. "You'll leave now," Boone stated, his words heavy with finality. "And not just from this land, but from her story." "I already did," Langley replied, his voice barely above a whisper, as if the weight of his departure had silenced him. Bellstar, with the door ajar, stood against the howling wind, her shawl fluttering, yet her stance unwavering. "If you're here to offer apologies," she thought, "save your breath for the journey back." Langley's gaze met hers, and for the first time the veneer of his composure shattered. "I'm not sorry for leaving," he confessed, his voice cracking under the weight of his realization. "But I'm sorry I never saw what was right in front of me." But Bellstar's eyes remained as cold as the winter air, her resolve unshaken. With a nod, Langley turned away, mounting his horse with the quiet resignation of a man who knew he had lost more than he could ever regain. The crunch of hooves on the frozen earth was the only sound marking his departure. Boone exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding, his relief palpable as he returned to the porch. Bellstar reached for his hand, her touch grounding him. "You didn't have to come out," she said, her voice a gentle murmur against the harshness of the wind. "I wanted to," he replied, his voice carrying a mix of pride and defiance. "I wanted him to see that you didn't disappear, that you grew, that you became, that—" Boone looked at her, his eyes reflecting the truth of her transformation. He nodded slowly, the acknowledgement of her strength and resilience. That night, the fire cast long shadows into the silent hours. EMTT and Samuel, nestled against Bellstar, drifted into the soft embrace of sleep. Boone, with a small toy horse taking shape under his skilled hands near the hearth, watched over them. Bellstar gazed down at the boys, both enveloped in warmth and safety, and knew with a certainty that there was no turning back. Not for any of them. Boone set aside his carving and moved to sit beside her. They sat in silence, the only sounds the gentle creak of the rocking chair and the rhythmic breathing of children. "I love you," Boone said, his words as simple and profound as a heartbeat. Bellstar turned to him, her eyes wide with surprise. "You do?" He nodded, his expression earnest. "I didn't, until now. The very thought of losing you to another's whim made me question my own depths of despair. Not a world where I would battle or fire a shot, but one where I would exist without your light. It hollowed me out." She smiled, a gentle curve of understanding. "Fear had kept my words locked away, but now, you don't have to be afraid anymore," she whispered. Bellstar's fingers, soft and sure, traced the lines of his face. "I love you too," she confessed, her voice brimming with a love that surpassed all she had ever known. Boone's kiss was not fleeting this time, nor was it merely polite. It was a kiss that acknowledged every scar she bore, every mark of shame that once defined her. Yet in his eyes, none of it mattered. She was not a woman he pitied or took out of some misplaced kindness. She was not a charity case or a mere placeholder in his life. She was his wife, his life's partner, the nurturing soul to their boys, and the very pulse of their home. Outside, the snow continued its gentle descent, blanketing the world in a serene slumber. Yet within the Carter cabin, beneath a roof lovingly mended and beside a fire that danced with warmth, love had entrenched itself into the very earth, steadfast, unapologetic, and eternal. And now, as we close this chapter of our shared journey, I extend my heartfelt thanks to each of you for joining us. Your presence here has made this story come alive. Please, if this tale has stirred your heart, leave a comment. Let us know your thoughts. Share this with someone who needs to feel this love. And don't forget to like and subscribe. Let's keep this warmth spreading far and wide.